Welcome back to Don't Wing It. Today, we are going to talk about launching your podcast well. Okay, so my husband is a pilot and he flies corporate. So that means he flies people that are in corporate positions of a company. Okay, so we're comparing how you launch your podcast well to launching an airplane in the sky. So y'all know I love talking about launches, podcast launches specifically, because we want to create a long, long runway. So let's kind of take a step back and pretend that we are going with my husband to prep the airplane for its launch, prepare the airplane for it to take off. Okay. So this is how it starts. And listen, I did not ask him specifically, but this is just what I've gathered in the years that we've been married of what happens. This could be totally, maybe even not to the extent that he does this, but this is what happens when he gets the airplane ready, mostly. Okay. So the first thing is the trip is put on the schedule. Okay. So they have someone who is entirely responsible for the schedule. And so that person will put it on the schedule in the computer system. The pilot gets a notification. He or she reads their schedule and it details everything. It details what time takeoff is. It details the show time, which means when you show up. It details where the destination is. The weather of not the weather, that's coming next, but it details the destination, the time zone. It also is if it is at time when they are sitting and waiting for the passengers, if it's a day trip or if it's an overnight trip or if it's, for extended amount of time. So it shows all of that. Okay. So the pilot sees all that. Okay. He sees the schedule. She sees the schedule detailing everything. That's like a month before or 2 weeks before, unless there's a pop-up surprise trip. And that's usually a few days before. Then the day before the airplane is going to fly out, the pilot goes into the office, pilot, co-pilot go into the office and they file the flight plan. Then the morning of the flight, they arrive in full uniform. So they've got their uniform, they got the epaulets, they're ready. Okay. So they get there, then they have to get there early. So usually the show time is different, obviously, than the time that the flight is taking off. Usually it's 2 hours before. So then they show up for that. Then they look at the flight plan that they filed the day before, and then they start looking at weather, and they look at the airplane and the airport and the visibility of it. They look at the visibility of where they are right now. And so they look at that, they look at the flight plan, they make sure that they input their destination on the computer in the jet. Okay. So they look at the flight plan in the office, then they go walk out to the jet, they get in there, they put their bags away, they make sure the airplane inside is looking nice, and then they input their destination in the computer on the jet. Now, then they're going to make sure that the airplane is pre-flighted. So that means they're doing a whole walk around. They're making sure the oil and gas is checked right. And then the maintenance company usually does this, but the pilot always checks that. That is on the checklist. Okay. The airplane inside has been fully restocked with things that they need. If it's, a nice jet, then they're going to have pillows and blankets, and they're going to have coffee, and they're going to have Cokes and waters and snacks. And, they have a company to do that as well, but they are checking that. They are double checking, because when it comes down to it, the buck stops with the pilot. Okay. Because they're in charge of the flight. Okay. Then they're going to do their pre-flight checklist. Okay. So this is a whole checklist. They have a clipboard. Y'all, this is the coolest thing. They clip it to their leg. Like it's a piece of Velcro. They put it on their leg. They have a pin. Always, you will never find my husband without a pin anywhere. But I definitely believe it's because when he was 15 training to be a pilot, he always had one with him because he needed to do it for the checklist. So they have this checklist. Okay. It's pre-flight. Then they're like, well, we need to start the engines, right? So they start the engine. Then they are boarding, they're greeting the passengers. Then they go in and do their final checklist. And in this, they are talking to the tower. They are talking to the tower to say, hey, we're taking off at this time. This is the altitude we're going to go to. This is what this is the direction. And then they close the door and then they make sure everybody's sitting well. They, buckled up. Everybody is good. Then they're ready to taxi out onto the runway. Okay. So they're taxiing out to the runway. Again, they do another checklist. I mean, it is very, very thorough because obviously this is very important. The safety of the crew and for that airplane and that flight is on them. And so they're talking to the tower, they taxi out to the runway, they're continuing to talk to the tower. They do another checklist, then they're going to taxi to the end of the runway where they're about to get ready to take off. They're going to do one more check. They're going to talk to the tower again. They're going to spool up those engines to the height, and that's when you're about to go. You're going to maybe start bouncing a little bit, and so you're going to start traveling down the runway, bouncing as we go. And then they hit a certain whatever the end of the runway, almost the end of the runway, whatever feet, and they lift off, and you're like and you feel that that motion as you lift off, and then here we go. It's a very long process. It's a long process. It starts a month before. It starts 2 weeks before. And then all of the details of in the office and then in the airplane and around the airplane and throughout that whole process, it is a long process. And they have to use that full long runway or they are not going to get that momentum of that airplane into the sky. And so, all that to say is, we can use this visual, this perspective of a pilot or of an airplane launching into the air, a airplane flying and taking that long runway down to get that momentum to get in the air. And we can look at that and we can see a similarity with a podcast launch or really any launch for that matter for your business. But specifically today, we're going to talk about it of how it will. Relate to a podcast launch. Okay. The first one is they don't allow enough time. They don't allow enough time. That's a mistake I see people making every week with their podcast. They don't allow enough time for the podcast launch. Okay. For the pre work, the pre getting it ready. Okay. That's one thing. Number two, they don't look at the timing. They don't look at the timing of how long a launch can take. And they don't look at when they're wanting to launch their podcast and then backing it up 4 weeks. And so that's another mistake that I see a lot of business owners doing. So jumping in before you have the plan is like jumping into a jet, starting in the middle of the runway and not having enough space to take off. Like, it's premature. And so I just want to encourage you with that, is that yes, get the idea, write the idea down, get all of your content, and then really make sure that you allow enough time for your podcast launch. I want you to be successful with your podcast. I want you to be successful in your launch so that you can start bringing leads into your business. And if you don't know how to do any of these four things, like if you're like, I don't know about timing, Ren, I don't know. Um, I, I've got to look at the timing. I've got to make sure that I'm sharing it creatively. I need to make sure I'm talking about it enough. I need to make sure that I am allowing enough time to share about it. If you don't know how to do any of those four things, there is nothing more than what I would want your podcast to succeed. There's nothing more than I want that for you, and I want to help. So I want you to picture this. Picture this. I can see you now. It's the beginning of March 2024, and you are opening your computer with your coffee cup in your hand, with probably lipstick on the side if you're like me, and you smile from ear to ear when you start reading emails. And those aren't just any ordinary emails. These are emails that came in this morning after your podcast launched. Your listeners, your people are saying things like, thank you so much for this. And I didn't know what you did until hearing episode 2. You continue the smile. You can hardly contain your smile from ear to ear, and you cannot wait to reply back to them. You get a lump in your throat and you wished you had started your podcast sooner. That's the picture you want to see, isn't it? And if it is, I want to invite you to reach out to me through email at ren@renrobbins.com and tell me what you need help with. If you need help with your launch plan, I would love to walk you in that path. If you want help with your whole podcast, where you're like, I really want to launch it in quarter 1, the doors are opening for my Flight Podcast Plan group program where you can launch your podcast within 10 weeks. This could be you. And I want you to remember that I succeed when you succeed. And so I want to encourage you with that and to take these things to heart and really think about these things and how this can help your podcast and make it succeed. And remember, I'm here to help because life is too short to just wing it. I'll see you next time. Bye, friends.